He had always thought of himself as a pioneer of science, a humble explorer of the unknown, but nothing in his entire career had prepared him for stepping out of a shimmering, anti-gravity transport onto a planet that looked like a kaleidoscope had vomited across the horizon. The ground shifted under his boots in a way that made him question gravity itself, and towering flora swayed as though they had opinions about him personally. His notebook, crammed with careful observations about alien physiology and culture, felt suddenly inadequate. Even his meticulously polished earth shoes seemed inappropriate for what he quickly realized was going to be a day full of very strange experiences. As he fumbled with his equipment, a group of figures appeared at the edge of the plaza. At first glance, they seemed like an ordinary welcoming committee, well, by alien standards, which was obviously nothing like ordinary. Their skin shimmered with subtle hues that shifted like oil on water, their eyes sparkled with unnatural colors, and their movements were fluid, almost like they were dancing without music. And then he noticed them, the way they glanced at him, the shared smiles and the tiny, conspiratorial nudges. That was when the thought first crossed his mind, though he immediately dismissed it. These aliens were mischievous. And possibly flirting. One of them, taller than the others, with cerulean skin that seemed to glow faintly in the sunlight, stepped forward and spoke in a sing-song tone. He tried to bow politely but tripped slightly over the uneven ground, earning a giggle from the alien, a sound so melodic and contagious he actually laughed at himself. "Welcome to, your cultural exchange program," he said, trying to sound confident while feeling like a newborn foal. He had been told he was volunteering for a scientific mission, and the briefing had emphasized that he would be learning about the daily life and reproductive customs of this colony. He hadn't realized just how literal daily life would get. The female aliens clustered around him, their expressions alternating between curiosity, amusement, and something dangerously like expectation. One of them, a shorter alien with faintly iridescent hair, reached out to adjust his Earth-issued backpack in a way that caused him to stumble into her, leading to a very awkward brush of their arms. He straightened himself, muttering something about gravity anomalies, completely oblivious to the sparkle in her eyes. The others whispered amongst themselves, obviously plotting. He assumed they were discussing his suitability as a research subject, or perhaps debating how to introduce him to local customs. Little did he know, he was being sized up for a very different kind of experiment. They led him through winding streets made of materials that seemed simultaneously solid and liquid, and everywhere he looked, alien citizens stared with polite interest or outright fascination. Every now and then, a hand brushed against his arm or shoulder in what he interpreted as accidental contact, but the aliens were experts at subtle seduction gestures, their fingers trailing like teasing whispers. When a small, glowing orb floated near his face, he instinctively reached out to poke it, only for it to dart away and splash a faint, sparkling liquid across his cheeks. He assumed it was some sort of welcome ritual. It was actually a pheromone enhancer, designed to increase his responsiveness. He didn't suspect a thing. The aliens were patient, though. Their strategy was subtle and comedic, relying on the fact that he couldn't possibly understand their intentions. They introduced him to a cultural immersion mentor, a tall, elegant alien with a sly smile and an obvious fondness for mischief. She explained their colony's rituals with a tone so serious that he nodded dutifully, jotting down every word in his notebook. The mentor guided him to a small chamber where the walls pulsed with soft bioluminescent light. He assumed it was a sensory chamber to enhance observational skills. The mentor demonstrated ceremonial hand gestures, which he mimicked awkwardly, only to find that each movement subtly encouraged closeness and touch. When his fingers accidentally brushed hers, she gasped softly, and he scribbled in his notebook. "Aliens are unusually sensitive to tactile stimuli. Interesting." By the time they reached the central plaza, the group of alien women had already begun quietly plotting their next moves. They whispered and pointed discreetly, giggling like schoolgirls, while he enthusiastically catalogued every odd plant, creature, and building. He was utterly oblivious to the way their gazes lingered, or how one of them pressed a tiny glowing device against his hand. "To measure Earth-human compatibility," which in reality was designed to subtly make him more cooperative. Every smile and accidental touch was a step in their secret plan. He didn't suspect anything, and that was exactly how they liked it. As he paused to admire a particularly bizarre fountain that flowed upward instead of down, one of the aliens sidled closer, brushing against him again. He flinched slightly, apologized profusely, and then laughed, noting in his notebook that they were extremely graceful despite occasional collisions. Meanwhile, the women exchanged triumphant looks behind his back. They had chosen well. The human's innocence, enthusiasm, and complete lack of suspicion made him the perfect candidate. Every gesture, every small potion trick, every accidental spark of their pheromones was working exactly as intended. The stage was set for what promised to be a chaotic, hilarious, and very adult adventure, and he still thought it was all just a cultural exchange. By the time he was shown to his quarters, he was exhausted, enchanted, and entirely oblivious. Little did he know, the colony had already decided that tonight would be the first real step in their mischievous plan. And while he thought he was preparing to observe alien culture, in reality, the aliens were preparing to observe him, and perhaps turn him into the father of a new, very unusual generation. The next morning, the human scientist awoke to the soft, lilting hum of the alien colony. Sunlight, or what passed for sunlight on this world, filtered through walls that shimmered like liquid crystal, painting his quarters in every shade of impossible color. He yawned, stretched, and took careful notes in his notebook about the peculiar air quality and the subtle bioluminescent lighting. To him, it was all scientific observation. To the women of the colony, it was perfect timing. The moment he stepped out of his quarters, they were already plotting the first official stage of their experiment, a plan so elaborate and absurd it could have come straight from a slapstick comedy. One of the aliens, the tall, elegant mentor who had guided him yesterday, sidled up with a clipboard, or what he assumed was a clipboard, though it pulsed faintly and occasionally twitched on its own. She explained the first activity of the day, a cultural immersion demonstration, designed to teach him about the colony's mating rituals. He nodded enthusiastically, completely unaware of the adult undertones behind the word mating. As he followed her through a labyrinth of twisting corridors, he marveled at the architecture, the fauna, and the occasional floating orb that seemed to monitor his every step. What he didn't notice was that the mentor and her fellow conspirators were whispering and nudging each other with barely concealed excitement. The first attempt was subtle, a zero-gravity dance lesson. The women invited him to float alongside them in a chamber filled with suspended, glowing platforms. He assumed it was some sort of physical coordination exercise. He flailed awkwardly, arms and legs going every which way, bumping into the aliens, nearly toppling a few glowing orbs, and causing a cascade of sparkling liquid to spray across the floor. The women gasped theatrically at each stumble, not because he was dangerous, but because every accidental touch, every clumsy brush of a hand, played perfectly into their plan. He scribbled in his notebook, "Aliens' coordination impressive despite unpredictable gravity effects. Must study further." He still didn't suspect anything. Next came the aromatic exploration. The aliens presented him with a variety of steaming vials, claiming they contained the scents of the colony's native flowers. He sniffed cautiously, jotting down his impressions in meticulous detail, while the women watched, barely containing their amusement. One vial, they knew, contained a subtle pheromone meant to make him more receptive to their presence. He sneezed spectacularly, sending sparks flying, and mumbled apologies while wiping the residue off his hands, completely oblivious to the effect it had on the aliens, who were now giggling behind their hands and exchanging satisfied glances. They followed with a team-building exercise in the gardens, which he assumed was some form of cooperative problem-solving. In reality, it involved strategically placing himself in positions that allowed the aliens to test his reactions to physical closeness, all while he thought he was arranging alien flora for optimal sunlight absorption. One alien brushed against him while reaching for a floating seed pod. Another accidentally, or so she pretended, dropped a leaf on his shoulder, which he dutifully picked up and examined, all the while muttering, Attention to detail crucial in cross-species research. The women exchanged triumphant looks. Every interaction was moving their experiment forward. Lunchtime brought its own absurdities. The mentor presented a tray of exotic foods, some of which contained mild stimulants that affected him in unexpected ways, an occasional blush, a sudden surge of energy, or the involuntary twitches that made him seem even more charming in the eyes of the aliens. He complimented the taste, analyzed the texture, and made notes about the nutritional value, all while completely missing the suggestive glances and soft giggles from the women around him. One of them leaned just close enough that he could feel her breath, and he remarked, entirely earnestly, how refreshing the colony's air circulation system was. The afternoon continued with more research exercises, telepathic suggestion tests, which he thought were cognitive puzzles, tactile experiments, which he thought were tests of alien skin texture, and a demonstration of ritual gestures, which involved graceful, intimate movement that caused him to stumble and flail spectacularly. Every moment was carefully orchestrated by the alien women to generate small, comedic, and suggestive situations. Each accidental touch, misplaced step, or sneeze that sent sparkles into the air made him seem both heroic and endearingly awkward. By evening, he was exhausted but exhilarated, unaware of the true nature of the day's events. He returned to his quarters, scribbling notes, furiously, marveling at the alien's beauty, grace, and apparently infinite patience with his clumsiness. The women watched him go, whispering and giggling, each plotting the next stage of their scheme. His oblivious enthusiasm, combined with his genuine charm, had made him more desirable than any alien male candidate could have been. They had succeeded in keeping him clueless, yet completely cooperative. Every slip, every stumble, every innocent compliment had worked perfectly in their favor. As the sun, or whatever passed for it, set across the alien sky, the mentor peeked into his quarters and whispered softly to the other women. "Tonight we escalate. He still suspects nothing, and that makes him perfect." The scientist, meanwhile, collapsed onto his bed, utterly unaware that the colony had already decided he would become the father of their future children. He thought he was merely learning, observing, and taking notes. The reality, of course, was far more adult, far more comedic, and far more romantic than he could possibly imagine. The next day, the human scientist woke with a mixture of excitement and exhaustion, his notebook crammed with scribbles that no one on Earth would ever understand. He assumed that yesterday had been a whirlwind of cultural observations and team-building exercises, never suspecting that the aliens had been carefully orchestrating every moment for their own amusement, and for reasons that had nothing to do with science. By breakfast, he was already being nudged toward the central plaza by a trio of the female aliens, who had decided that today would be the real test, the fertility ceremony disguised as a cultural demonstration. He trailed behind them, utterly oblivious, marveling at the floating fountains, iridescent plants, and strange creatures that scuttled along the edges of the plaza. The aliens moved gracefully, their every step calculated to guide him into awkward, yet suggestively intimate positions. One leaned close to whisper a phrase in his ear, which he interpreted as an idiomatic expression, while her proximity caused an involuntary shiver that made the other women exchange satisfied glances. He jotted it down in his notebook. Alien speech patterns involve tonal shifts that can elicit unexpected emotional responses. Must research further. The truth, of course, was far more personal than he could imagine. The ceremony began with a display of glowing crystals and swirling lights, each one hovering above a pedestal, pulsating rhythmically. The women instructed him to touch the crystals in a specific order, explaining it as a method of understanding energy flow in the colony. He obeyed, careful and meticulous, yet every movement somehow involved brushing against an alien in ways that were both accidental and deliberate. When his hand lingered on the crystals, their vibrations caused subtle physical reactions, soft shivers, gasps, and small sparks of light dancing across skin. He thought it was a fascinating demonstration of alien physics, never considering that the reactions were orchestrated for maximum effect on him, and for maximum entertainment for the aliens. At one point, he tripped over a small levitating platform, flailing his arms wildly. He collided with a particularly elegant alien, and in trying to catch himself, he ended up accidentally embracing her. She froze for a moment, eyes wide, before recovering with a soft laugh, gently guiding him upright. He muttered apologies, utterly clueless, and then immediately returned to analyzing the floating lights. Behind him, the other aliens whispered, "Perfect, he's exactly how we hoped." The ceremony moved into what they called the synchronized movement exercise, which was essentially a highly choreographed dance designed to bring him into close contact with each of them. He followed their motions with a combination of awe and panic, occasionally spinning too fast, knocking into floating orbs, and causing bursts of harmless but highly embarrassing glitter to explode into the air. Every misstep elicited a soft gasp or playful laughter from the aliens, heightening the romantic tension without him ever realizing why. His notes became increasingly frantic, filled with observations such as, "Aliens respond strongly to touch and movement, must catalog emotional response patterns." As the afternoon sun, or the alien equivalent, shifted, one of the more mischievous women presented him with a vial of a sparkling liquid, claiming it was a ceremonial refreshment meant to enhance his observational abilities. He drank it eagerly, only to feel a sudden warmth spreading through him, making his cheeks flush and his words stumble. He interpreted this as a mild allergic reaction or a sign of excitement about the colony's culture. The women, meanwhile, exchanged triumphant smiles, whispering that the effects were perfect and that his reactions were delightfully human. Then came the telepathic suggestion challenge, which he assumed was a cognitive puzzle. The women surrounded him in a circle, lightly touching his shoulders, arms, and hands, and whispered instructions that he dutifully repeated, believing he was participating in a mental exercise. In reality, the combination of pheromones, subtle vibrations, and carefully timed gestures was designed to make him more compliant, more relaxed, and, unbeknownst to him, more aware of his own attraction to them. Every blush, every stammer, every innocent glance at their glowing eyes played directly into their plan. By evening, chaos reached its peak. He had accidentally activated a small levitating device that sent him spinning around the chamber, colliding with half the participants in hilarious fashion. A spray of glittering liquid landed on the wrong alien, causing her to squeal and slip, which in turn made him fall into a soft pile of cushions. The women erupted into laughter, some genuinely amused, others hiding their own racing hearts behind masks of playfulness. He untangled himself, flushed and exhilarated, and jotted down in his notebook, "Aliens demonstrate remarkable sense of humor and physical agility under unexpected conditions." Amid the chaos, something unexpected happened. He noticed them. Not as subjects of study, not as participants in his experiments, but as individuals. The elegance, the laughter, the subtle ways they cared for him even as they tricked him, all of it struck him as beautiful and endearing. He realized, in that dizzying whirlwind of lights, floating platforms, and sparkling fluids, that he was enjoying their company in a way that went beyond observation. For the first time, he felt a genuine connection, an unspoken bond that was messy, chaotic, and entirely alien, but it made his heart pound in ways no laboratory experiment ever had. The ceremony ended with the women surrounding him, whispering final instructions, giggling softly, and guiding him back to the plaza entrance. He bowed politely, thanked them for the enlightening exercises, and left, notebook clutched tightly. The aliens, however, were ecstatic. He still didn't suspect the true purpose behind their antics, but the misadventures, accidental touches, and shared laughter had brought them closer than any direct approach could have. Tonight they would take their next step, confident that their carefully executed chaos had set the stage for romance, comedy, and a very adult kind of bonding. By the time evening fell over the alien colony, the human scientist was utterly exhausted, though he didn't realize just how much of his day had been orchestrated for the amusement and strategic purposes of the female aliens. He assumed that he had simply survived another full day of bizarre cultural exercises, floating platforms, sparkling liquids, and telepathic puzzles. What he didn't suspect was that tonight's ceremonial finale was the culmination of a week-long, meticulously planned operation designed to bring him into intimate proximity with every conspirator, while maintaining the perfect blend of chaos, comedy, and inadvertent seduction. The women had transformed the central plaza into a breathtaking spectacle. Floating orbs glowed softly in gradients of violet and turquoise, casting long, shifting shadows over the undulating ground. Crystalline fountains pulsed rhythmically, and the air was filled with the scent of exotic flora and subtle pheromones that he completely misinterpreted as aromatherapy. They moved with precision, creating a choreographed labyrinth that he was supposed to navigate as part of yet another cultural immersion exercise. Each step, each stumble, each accidental collision had been designed to create physical closeness without him ever realizing its purpose. He stepped carefully, notebook clutched like a lifeline, noting the strange resonance of the crystals beneath his feet and the peculiar vibration of the hovering platforms. At first, he moved cautiously, but as the ceremony progressed, he found himself involuntarily interacting with the aliens. A brush of a hand here, an accidental step onto a floating pedestal there, and he was suddenly wrapped in the graceful chaos of the colony's most elaborate ritual yet. Every misstep was amplified by his own clumsiness, sending sparks of glowing liquid in arcs that shimmered in the soft light, eliciting gasps and laughter from the women. He assumed the spectacle was a test of reflexes and coordination, never realizing it was a subtle, seductive game. At one point, he collided with the mentor, the tall, elegant alien who had been subtly guiding him throughout the week. In trying to steady both himself and the hovering pedestal he had misjudged, he inadvertently embraced her. She froze for a heartbeat, eyes wide, then laughed softly, guiding him upright while their hands lingered just a fraction too long. He muttered a flustered apology, scribbled furiously in his notebook about tactile responses and emotional cues, and then backed away, completely oblivious to the effect his awkward embrace had caused. Behind him, the other women exchanged delighted looks. The plan was working perfectly. He was both utterly naive and increasingly endearing. The climax of the evening was the so-called ritual of harmony, which involved a circle of floating crystals and a synchronized sequence of gestures meant to align the energies of the participants. He followed along, misreading every signal and fumbling with the gestures, which only caused the women to swoon subtly, giggle quietly, or cover their mouths in amusement. When a burst of sparkling liquid accidentally sprayed across his chest, one of the aliens instinctively moved closer to steady him, causing him to stumble forward, resulting in yet another accidental, but intimate, contact. He noted in his notebook, "Alien reflexes highly adaptive to unexpected disturbances. Must study further." The innuendo, of course, went completely over his head. By the time the ceremony ended, he was exhausted, exhilarated, and completely unaware of the effect he had had on the entire group. The women, however, were euphoric. Their subtle manipulations, chaotic exercises, and carefully orchestrated accidents had worked perfectly. Not only had they succeeded in bringing him physically closer, but they had also fostered genuine connection and mutual admiration. Even he had begun to notice a strange warmth in his chest when he looked at them, a flutter he didn't yet understand. He assumed it was cultural appreciation or perhaps the excitement of cross-species cooperation. As the scientist retreated to his quarters, the women gathered, whispering excitedly about the day's successes. One of them, brushing a glowing strand of hair behind her ear, murmured, "He still doesn't suspect a thing." Another giggled, "Exactly as planned. And yet, I think he's starting to enjoy it too." Their voices were soft, melodic, full of triumph and amusement, as they began quietly preparing for the next steps of their mischievous plan. In his quarters, the human sat on the edge of his bed, notebook in hand, scribbling observations about energy flows, pheromone responses, and tactile feedback. He smiled, exhausted but happy, thinking about how fascinating, elegant, and funny the aliens were. He had no idea that the subtle touches, accidental embraces, sparkling liquids, and chaotic exercises had all been designed with a very adult purpose. Yet there was a warmth in his chest, a sense of connection he couldn't fully explain, and he found himself looking forward to the next day with a mix of scientific curiosity and something else, something new and thrilling. As the lights dimmed across the colony and the soft hum of floating crystals filled the night air, The women watched him from their hiding places, smiles wide, hearts racing, and spirits high. The human remained blissfully unaware of how perfectly he had been ensnared in their plan, but in a way, it didn't matter. Laughter, chaos, flirtation, and curiosity had done their work. In the end, he was theirs to observe, theirs to charm, and perhaps, in time, theirs to be the father of their future children. And even without realizing it, he had already begun to fall in love with the beauty, humor, and audacious mischief of his alien companions.